Hey everyone, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today we're going to be walking you through how to rebuild a trailer hub. And we're going to be using this utility trailer as an example. Really common setup here. And this one has an idler hub like this. But all this information and all the techniques are also going to be applicable to the hub and drum assemblies like this one, as well as disc brake assemblies. And that's as long as they are a grease type hub, not an oil bath. Now with that said, the rebuild kit is going to be dependent on what type of axle you have. So depending on your setup, that's really going to dictate what parts you're gonna need in order to rebuild your hub, right? If you already know that information, excellent, If not, and you're still trying to figure out the parts that you're actually going to need, you can figure out what axle you have. A lot of times there will be a little tag or something like this attached to the axle tube, or a placard that's riveted on, a sticker. Sometimes I've seen them actually stamp that information into the axle tube itself, and you can reference that, figure out what you got, and kind of go from there. Another technique would be to take everything apart, and a lot of times you'll have some information on the bearings and things like that you can reference to get you the right parts. And also something to pay attention to, sometimes it makes a difference if you happen to have what's called an easy lube type axle, meaning if the caps on your trailer look like this, where there's a little removable plug, that way you can get to grease fitting in there, that's what the easy lube type axle is. So being that there's so many kits and parts available to rebuild all different types of hubs, it's important that you get the right ones, that way everything goes smoothly. With all that in mind though, why don't we get right to it? We'll start taking everything apart and get these hubs rebuilt. So it first starts with jacking your trailer up, making sure it's safe and secure and everything, enough to get the wheel up off the ground and get the wheel and tire out of the way. Pop this off and set it to the side. We can get our cap off now. In our case, it's wore, it's incredibly loose. A lot of times though, you'll have to take a little tool like this or a flathead screwdriver, kind of do one of these deals, take a hammer to help kind of pop it off like that. Do recommend having a piece of cardboard or something set off to the side where you can put all these parts on. In our case, the retainer is a cotter pin, so I'm gonna straighten those ends out. Remove it. You should be able to just grab the axle nut. Sometimes if it's tight, you might have to get a socket or a pair of channel locks or something to break it loose. So these, I got a little more leverage here. Makes removing this a lot easier. You should be able to grab her hub. Let's kind of swiftly pull back on it. So we pop that out. Our seal and the bearing actually stayed on the spindle. Came right off though. That's why when I pull that hub, I try to do it kind of swiftly in case these are seized up a little bit. That usually gives it enough force to pull them off or at least loosen them up. So there's our seal. And then what you want to do is clean all this old stuff off and inspect the spindle. Make sure we don't have any major gouges or scoring or anything like that. After cleaning up the spindle, I just use brake clean, and let it dry and everything, wiped it clean. Spindle checks out, no major gouges or nothing crazy like that happening. What I'm doing here, I'm just taking the grease that I'm going to use to pack the bearings with and just applying a coat onto the spindle. You want to avoid getting a bunch of it up here on this portion where the seal's going to slide onto. A really thin layer is fine, but we're also going to do a thin layer on the actual seal. So just don't have a huge blob, big mess on there. Also, don't forget to clean the components that you're going to reuse, like your axle nut, for example. So I'll get that done. And since I'm doing this to both sides of our trailer, I'm going to go over there and get to the same point. Now that we have our hub off, we can start taking apart all the components. And since they're all going to be getting replaced, we'll first start by taking the seal out. Our hub is really dirty, so I came in with a wire brush, just kind of clean up some of that junk there. And we want to pry this seal out. Now they make seal tools, removal tools. A lot of people probably could have that. You can use a pry bar or a screwdriver, something like that. You want to avoid hitting the seal out through the bearing there, because you could just potentially damage other components. That's the best method to do it here. So we'll just get underneath the lip of that seal and start to work it out here. We got that popped out. Now we can get access to that bearing. We'll set this to the side, and I'm gonna come in here and clean up all of this grease and everything else. That way we can kind of have a better look and get these cups or races removed. I got our hub all cleaned out and everything, and I just used paper towels, some brake clean, wiped it all out, blew it with some compressed air, get all the junk out of there. And you just want to take a quick look at the actual hub, particularly in the areas where seals and everything go. Just make sure there's no crazy gouges or it's not super tore up or anything out of the ordinary. Ours looks good. And now we can actually drive the races out here. And how you want to do this, you want to use a brass punch, and you'll come in and hit the edge of the race. And usually you can give it a tap or two here, kind of work your way around it, doing your best not to actually drive this into the hub and everything to minimize, damage and things like that. So with that said, how I like to do this is set up a couple blocks of wood, lay that on there. That way the hub's actually off the ground a little bit, that way when you drive that race out, it can actually fall out and everything. You're not going to be hitting it into the ground. So and they are pressed in, so it is going to take a little bit of force. I felt like it just popped out, which it did. So there's our race. And I'll set this to the side and do the same thing to get this one out. Now that we have both of the races out, we cleaned up the inside of this again with our brake clean and paper towels and everything. And just do a quick visual inspection. Make sure there's no big cracks, gouges, major damage, anything along those lines, which ours looks good. So we'll grab our new races and get those in. With the new cups or races, you want to just compare them to the ones you removed. Make sure they're the same part numbers and everything, just to be on the safe side, which ours are. And it's a good idea too to kind of clean up your work area since we're dealing with new parts now. We don't really want debris and stuff getting in them. And so when you go to install these, they do make driver sets, but you know, unless this is something you're doing all the time, which it usually isn't in most cases, you know, you're probably not going to have that. And so I'm going to do it this way that most people at home would do. What we're looking to do is drive this race into the hub to where it'll sit flat on that little face there, on that little lip. And that's how we know it'll be fully seated. So we'll get this started as straight as we can. And I'm going to take a block of wood, just kind of lightly tap on it to get it going. And then as far as getting it the rest of the way in, we can very carefully use our punch. And you want to be careful when you're doing this. You know, you don't want to damage that cup. That's why we use brass, because it's a softer metal and it's a lot more forgiving if you do happen to touch it or anything like that. So once you drive that cup all the way down, you know, you'll feel it bottom out. You know, once you think it's all the way down there, not a bad idea to just go back around a couple more times, continue to tap it in place until it is completely seated. You flip it over, do the same thing for the other side, and then probably not a bad idea to come back to, wipe all this down again, and just make sure it's clean. With this all cleaned out and everything, the cups or races completely seated and driven into place, we can pack our bearings. Now, you always want to start with the innermost bearing and the larger one, because that'll go down in there, and then our seal will go in place, right? So what I like to do is just visually inspect the bearings, even though they're brand new. You know, you never know. One might be dented or something like that during manufacturing or shipping. Just to be on the safe side. That one looks good. This one also looks good. Moves freely and everything. One thing you don't want to do is, you know, some of these come with like shipping oil on them. You can wipe that off. One thing you definitely don't want to do is take compressed air and air gun and spin this thing dry or anything like that. So keep that in mind. But in order to pack a bearing, there's several different types of tools and stuff that are out there. This is a pretty popular one where you put the bearing in there and then you just smash this down. It'll pack it full of grease. But a lot of people don't have that type of thing. And honestly, myself, I almost prefer to do it by hand. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And so what you want to do, take the grease of your choice. This is just general purpose stuff here. And remember what type of grease you originally do too, because if you ever want to go back and repack the bearings, ideally you'd use the same stuff. You don't really want to mix different types of greases. I try to just use the same exact one. But what you do here, you got that blob on your hand, and you are going to take the bearing and these little rollers in it. What you want to do is force grease in through those rollers until it comes out through these openings. So you can take it and just kind of smash it into your hand and into the grease. And just continue to do that. And you really can't overpack a bearing. You know, it's not gonna hurt anything. So I'm starting to get that grease coming out of there. And these will eat a little more grease than what you might think. So I'll do this, get it going, you know, rotate it every now and again, kind of get those bearings spinning in there, and really try to do a good job to get all these bearings and everything completely coated. So I'll get this one wrapped up and do the other. Once you got your bearings packed, you can take a little bit of grease and apply it to the race or the cup there. On this side, make sure that this part is clean and dry where the seal's gonna go. And so same thing with the seal that we did with the bearings, just inspect it, make sure it looks good and everything, which ours does. And with the seals that are metal on the outside like this one, you want to apply a very light coat of silicone to it. If, for seals that have rubber coated, you can apply a light coat of oil to it. So in our case, we got some high temp silicone here. And this just helps kind of seal everything up. You don't have to get too carried away or anything, It's a light coat. So it looks pretty good there. Wipe that off. We'll grab our bearing. Drop that into place. And as far as the seal goes, it's really important that you try to drive this in straight. Again, there's drivers for this, but most people aren't going to have that. And so I like to push it in as much I can by hand, make sure it looks like it's going in level. And an old trick here, you can take a clean block of wood, then tap it to drive this in. So if it starts to kind of get wonky, go in a little bit more to one side, just tap a little heavy on the other side to get it in straight. And we're just looking to get this flush with the hub. So it looks like about this side's pretty good. I might have to go a little bit more over here. Once it's flush, and that's why a block of wood's a pretty good tool actually, as long as it's true and flat, it'll almost set it perfect almost every time. This is about exactly how you want your seal to be driven in right here, where it's level and true, pretty much exactly flush with the surface of the hub, and that should hold up for quite some time. If you want to, for the rubber portion of the seal, you can take just a very light coat of wheel bearing grease and apply it to that seal to help it kind of slide over the spindle when we install it. And then something I like to do too is just take some grease and apply it to the inside of the hub as well. Can take our assembly now and slide it onto our spindle. Take our smaller bearing, push that on, followed by the hardware that we removed, washer, our castle nut there, and right now I'm just going to get this as tight as I can by hand and get it torqued down. So when you torque these down, just use your axle manufacturer's specification. But while you're doing this, you want to be slowly rotating the hub as well. And what this is doing is it's seating everything. All right, so there we go. Have that torqued, and then without trying to spin the hub, back that nut off a little bit, right? And then you're just gonna run it until it's finger tight. And we get the holes in the castle nut to line up. If that's how your particular trailer is set up, you might have a different type of retainer. You know, concept's the same though. To set that preload and make sure everything gets seated, torque down, break it loose, finger tight. To make sure the nut stays in place, we'll take our cotter pin, which happens to be our type of retainer, put that through, and then bend the ends of it to keep it in position. With all that wrapped up, I did blob a little bit more grease in there, and also put some in our cap and a thin film around it. Now this particular bearing kit doesn't come with new caps, so you can always grab them separately, which is what I recommend while you're doing all this anyway. But if your original ones are in good shape, feel free to reuse those. Pretty simple to get the cap back on. You know, it's kind of like all the other parts we've been doing. You want to try to drive it in straight. You can use the block of wood method. You can use the punch to hit it in place. You can use a rubber mallet. You know, kind of like all the ways we showed you. That is one tool I do have, I use regularly, is this little cap driver, so I'm just going to use it. Tap that into position. Spins freely. Everything feels good. And now we can get the other side wrapped up. Go ahead and get your wheel and tire back in place. You know, snug the lug nuts down, get the trailer on the ground, and be sure to never forget to come back with a torque wrench and completely tighten down all the lug nuts to the manufacturer's specification. With everything all put back together, we are good to go until our next maintenance interval. So hopefully all this helps you out with your trailer maintenance.